Hi, welcome back. I'm still here with Chris. Chris is one of my long-term friends. We've been friends since you were 6, and I was 5 years old.
Sounds right.
Long time. And we're going to do a quick recap of our last 10 years of learning to shoot pigs at night. And kind of run through, maybe we'll call it roses and thorns for each of the different types of or generations of equipment we've used.
Sounds good.
So to start off with, just so that you guys have context, the ranch we hunt on has grown over the years, but it's about 4,000 acres. There's plenty of road access. It's all dirt. There's a lot of elevation change for the fact that we are in the panhandle of Texas.
It doesn't take much.
It doesn't take much. Most everything's flat, but the ranch we're on is an area that couldn't be farmed because it was too steep, because there's a canyon and a river that runs through a good section of it. The other kind of interesting constraints that we have, and I'm looking down at my notes, there's cattle on the property that graze, and so you need to be able to be really sure both of your species identification, but also your backstops and what are, you've got a herd of cows that are far away, you can't shoot, that kind of thing. And then the last kind of interesting hurdle is during hunting season, different sections of the ranch are actually leased out by different groups of people. And so while we're allowed to shoot pigs on it all the time, everywhere, we certainly don't want to be scaring at the deer, the morning before weekend opener for anyone. And so try to be respectful of the leasees in addition to the ranch owner is one of those interesting side effects that we've got. So. The result of that is that we've done a mix of vehicle and stationary-based hunting. If you're not familiar with the damage that pigs do, there's a report done by Texas A&M. You should go look at it. The long and short of it is you've got to kill 2/3 of the pigs every year in order for them to keep a steady population, and that hasn't ever happened.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and the pigs eat, they destroy crops and they eat feed, so we're hoping to land under out. Plus, when we're coming out here for deer season on the parts that aren't leased, it gives you one more sit. You sit in the morning, you sit at night, and you sit later in the night, which is really nice. So I figured we'd start off with white light.
Yeah.
So when we did white light, we were doing vehicle-based stuff mostly because sitting under white light isn't, we found out that the animals out here just don't come under the white light. If they go nocturnal, it's because they're used to hunting pressure.
Yeah.
So what are some roses and thorns that you found from white light?
So white light is great because it's, if you have a group, which we typically do, I think this is one of the few trips, if not the only one, where there's only been 2 of us. Typically we are groups of 3, 4 plus, and so white light is approachable for just about everybody. There's not a ton of specialized equipment.
Mm-hmm. Equipment's easily shared?
Yeah, equipment's easily shared. You can get away with that, and that on its own can allow you to be a bit more effective.
Mm-hmm.
And then the downside is that you miss some of the peak times. This year we actually set up some game cameras, cell game cameras, for tracking herds or sounders as they're coming in or out, and finding that that stuff happens at 1:30, 2:30, 4:30 in the morning. White light is not getting anything then.
Yep. Because you're not there.
Right.
So how about this? How about we run through what are 3 or 4 pieces of white light equipment that we use and how you would use them?
Yeah, so stationary versus moving around is going to be a little bit different, so I'll talk about moving around.
Yeah, because that's where we've been the most effective.
Right. So moving around, what we would typically do is, if there's 3 of us, two people in the front seat, somebody in the back, and spotlighting with very high lumen, very high candella spotlight.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, they're like the big handles with guns, practically in enough.
Either that or something like a modlight OKW.
Right. Something with some power and some reach, and we'll be spotlighting, and pretty much what you're looking for is eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And so as soon as you see something like that, you can do some species identification. Take that from there and communicate with your group about are we getting out of the truck? Are we shooting? Are we anything like that? And so. That's the first one that comes to mind for me.
Yep. So I was thinking that it's important to have a handheld because if you're driving around, someone's going to be driving. You've got headlights, and maybe even you have external mounted lights.
Yeah.
But being able to pick up eyes of vermin, or being able to see a pig, light it up well enough because they still have natural camouflage.
Yeah.
Being able to light it up enough that you can identify that is indeed a pig. A handheld light is super helpful.
Yeah.
And so maybe a little bit we should talk about our strategy. So if you assume 3 people, we found the most effective thing is you have a driver, a shooter, and a spotter. So your spotter is the person with the handheld light who's shining it around and catching the places where the headlights aren't pointing.
And from the back seat, which is where that spotter would typically be, you have direction on both ways. Whereas if that person in the front seat starts shining it past the driver, it's like that's a bad thing.
Yep, it's not ideal. And so the piece of equipment there is a handheld light. That roll is the spotter. So one of the interesting things that we found is the spotter is the one who's given commands. They are ultimately in charge of the vehicle.
Yeah.
And so if they see something, they can say slow or even speed up, like we need to get closer to it. I see something, but we need to get there. And then they can yell stop. And the driver's doing whatever the spotter says. Nobody else tries to communicate with the driver, passengers, people who are looky-loos, whatever. But it's the spotter that's in charge of the vehicle. And then when the vehicle stops and the person gets out, this could be a side-by-side or a four-wheeler or a truck. Okay. The spotter, because they're the most important person, because they're keeping eyes on whatever the thing is, they move and they're running. And normally they would have actually that handheld light, but then also a headlamp normally, so they can see bushes and stuff. And they're chasing or keeping the light. They're doing whatever they need to for light on. The shooter, when we yell stop, gets out. They're the one who's eventually responsible for species identification. So if the spotter saw something, it's the shooter because they're the one pulling the trigger. They need to know both that they're taking a safe shot and they're shooting the right species, and that's okay. And because they're the one who's lethal, it's their job to make sure that nobody can walk in front of their gunfire.
Yeah.
And that includes the spotter, because the spotter is only focused, they're 100% eyes on the critter that's running around. And so the shooter is the one who needs to be able to move around that light and then eventually go and take a shot. So,
and when you're only dealing with one shooter, that's an easier thing to manage. But if there's going to be a secondary shooter, that would typically be our driver.
Yep.
Because as soon as we've stopped, as soon as we've exited whatever vehicle that is, that person is a more deployable than the person with the spotter, who's like Hamilton said, is just trying to make sure that we're staying on top of stuff.
Yep. All right. So that's generally the way we go about doing that.
Yeah.
I would say that the pieces of equipment generally for white light are a handheld light, a headlamp so that you can navigate around something with a big flood, and then a rifle light. And the reason the rifle light matters is the shooter now can have their own source of illumination.
Yeah, it's almost like you hand over the, and still using the spotter as sort of that initial point. And and I would say like not necessary, but absolutely awesome. And when we started, they weren't around, but viridian, like the HS ones, just getting a laser of some kind. And there's other lasers out there, but something that's just so dang easy to use. Lasers make it easy.
And I would say the lasers are primarily useful for identifying what you're pointing at.
Right.
So the raccoon ran behind that bush.
Yeah.
They're going to be on the other side of the bush. Which bush? The bush that's green isn't that helpful. And so, but the laser saying like, this is the thing I think I'm going to go get. Or so either way. All right, I think we'll break the white light section there.
Yep.
And then we're going to stare to the camera because I don't know if I'm going to edit this into 2 videos.